Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel on working with your significant other in the creative realms, specifically and primarily in writing, authorship. This will be a very interesting panel. It's one that kind of was a result of talking to my wife about what type of panels I could do here. And we worked together very well. So we thought, you know, that is something that people need to know about, collaboration. Now, we're going to be talking about significant others. This also applies to partnerships, any type of collaboration you might have with another writer. But there is an old adage that says that when you collaborate with another writer, it has to be stronger than a marriage. Now, I don't subscribe to that. It has to be incredibly strong, but when you're collaborating with another writer, you can at least say, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And neither one of you has to say, and who fed the cat? So, but we're going to be talking about that. There's a lot involved with it, and it's not just writers working with writers. I don't know what your situation is, but many authors, many writers have a significant other who is integral to their creative process, even though that person might not be a writer. They are still a creative person. They're what I refer to as the silent partner. Without them, the writer is just isolated. But this is a trusting person that they can have conversations with and talk about their characters and their plots and all the things that they want to believe are perfect because they spring from their forehead until their partner says, love you, darling, but that sucks. And then you have to deal with the pride, the ego, the defensiveness, or you take it as appropriate criticism and you start to explore it. But it requires a lot of trust and a lot of respect. So this panel is made up of people who are involved in that. And I've got some little short bios here because of the people up here, Sharon Rice-Weber, you're the only person I don't actually know personally. So I'm going to read a little bio here as I wrote it up, okay, based on my research as best I could. Now, Sharon actually comes to this from that different perspective. She was working, I love that story about the bookstore. She was working in a bookstore when this guy walks in to see if any of his books have sold, and they hit it off on a major level, and ended up being married, where she became his muse, his advisor, his Jacqueline of all trades in the strange, weird universe of writing. And though she's not primarily a writer herself, her work with her husband is very much on topic for this panel, which is, at its core, childcare. And her husband is David Weber, author and co-author of books that fill pages and pages on Amazon and bookshelves everywhere, including the Honor Harrington series and the Safe Hold series and so many other books. It's always kind of weird that I hate, when I get introduced, I hate people introducing my wife as Steve's wife, but I'm required to do that in this particular case. Right here, Rebecca Moesta. Rebecca, I've known Rebecca for a long time, longer than either one of us want to admit. Rebecca has always been a storyteller since she was a teenager. That desire led her to an enviable career as an author, a publisher, an editor, and everything else that authors hire other people to do for them. She has done it all. Sure, her books include the Junior Jedi Knight series. She's done work within the Buffy Vampire Slayer universe. In that franchise. Her husband is Kevin J. Anderson, and Kevin is known for many things, including his adaptations of film and television franchises, continuing the Dune legacy with Brian Herbert, his Dan Shamble saga of the Seven Sons, and so on and so on. And also a graphic novel called Stalag X, which he wrote with some other writer, which we'll talk about maybe later. But Rebecca, as I have come to know her, has been the rock of their publishing. And I don't mean the rock in the business sense, because she is, but in the creative sense. Every time we have dealt with each other, she's got this weird left-right brain thing that she can switch back and forth. For many writers, that's a difficult thing to do, to shut one down and go to the other seamlessly. And that's a gift that Rebecca has. Sitting right here, this is Jessica Brawner. Jessica Brawner's writing career began accidentally when she started dating a writer, osmosis. Since then, she has released 3 nonfiction books, 1 novella, 1 full-length novel, many short stories, and has published and edited 3 anthologies and had her work appear in several more. Now, she is married to Stephen L. Sears. Stephen L. Sears, sitting here, I primarily come out of television. For the last 38 years and continuing, I've worked in the television film arena. I've worked on shows going back to the 80s. My second show that I staffed was called The A-Team. But I've worked on Riptide, A-Team, Hardcastle McCormick, Stingray, Jesse Hawks, Highwayman, Superboy. I'm forgetting some of them. Swamp Thing, I was the Walker, Texas Ranger, I might have mentioned that. I was the co-exec producer and one of the head writers for Xena Warrior Princess. I co-created the latest version of Sheena. I'm developing several projects right now. I also co-wrote a graphic novel with a guy named Kevin Anderson called Stalag X. And that is being developed right now as a feature film with Francis Lawrence to direct it. And Francis directed 3 of the Hunger Games. I Am Legend. Red Sparrow is one of my favorite directors, and fortunately he grabbed the rights to this book. I am now moving into prose. My first nonfiction book had to deal with working in the television industry, but I've now had stories published in anthologies dealing with the Alien versus Predator universe, Jeff Sturgeon's Last Cities of Earth, and a few other things. So I'm kind of filtering into it from another side. So in all of this, with all of these different creative people, as you know, creativity sometimes is a very individual thing because it's incredibly subjective. And the moment you take your little beautiful baby that you have created, and it is your beautiful baby, because you created it, it's wonderful and it's lovely, and you hand it over to someone and you say, look at my beautiful baby. I want you to love my beautiful baby. And they say, oh, I love your beautiful baby. If we could just take the arm off here and put it over here and the head over here and put it over there, now it's even more beautifuler. How do you deal with that? Welcome to our world. So I've got a few questions that I just want to kind of shoot out here. And I'm going to do this somewhat on an individual basis, and then I might cast some questions kind of uniformly. There's a certain aspect of collaboration that requires defining your boundaries. So I'm going to throw this to Rebecca first. As you are working on this in a creative realm, that's you, do you establish creative boundaries up front so that you don't cross into areas that can suddenly trigger defensiveness or pride or ego?
Do we now? Yes. Did we at the beginning? No. And it took us a few years of hurt feelings and a night or two on the sofa to get on top of that, because we figured out there are places where we each have strengths, and so we divided up certain authorities. Like if it's dialogue, I have the right to change any dialogue. If it has to do with plot or pacing, Kevin has the final word. So we just have areas that we broke down that we know we do the best if we split that up.
Okay, so you compartmentalize and accent your positives that you bring to it.
Many people have it where the senior writer, the one who has the most experience, gets the last say on everything, but that would not work out.
Okay, now, the reason I'm chuckling with this is that 4 of my questions just went out the window because she just answered all of them.
Uh-oh.
So I'm going to throw one down to Sharon. Now, this is something that I refer to as the creative bouncy castle. There is a zone that writers get into where they're in their own little creative bouncy castle, like those ones you see at a birthday party. And they just play and they throw the little balls around. And then somebody else has to get in the castle with them. And it either becomes a contest of wills or it becomes an incredibly fun, bouncy castle. Now, when you're working with David and you are in your little arena, you're already in the bouncy castle.
Oh, yeah.
How do you preserve that fun and creative aspect in the bouncy castle?
Ooh. Sometimes it's hard. David has a big ego. Anybody that's ever met him knows that. And I have to beat that ego down enough to get his head through the front door occasionally. So, especially after weekends or weeks like this, because everybody's, oh my God, it's David Weber. And I'm like, yeah, you still put your pants on the same way as I do, so shucks. But yeah, I mean, we go back and forth sometimes. He'll read this scene, see how it works. Okay? Well, it was okay. I need to work on it, so I'll go work on it. Comes back. Read this scene again. Okay, yeah, still, it's better, but it's, read this scene again. Okay, I'm crying. Oh my God, you did. That's it. I just got it. I just nailed it. So, sometimes being in his bouncy castle is great, but I live in the real world. He has a fleeting, relationship with the real world. He'll see it occasionally, in our children maybe, but other than that, it's like, no. He's the only person I know who can go down the staircase in our house and lose a pair of socks before he gets to the bottom. I mean, it's just, he just lost it. It was like, so, somebody has to stay on this plane of existence for them. And I think it's great that, Rebecca, sometimes you can switch back and forth. You have to be able to do that. David also calls me his auxiliary brain because he will be so into that bouncy castle that he can't see out the windows. And you sometimes have to go, no, that's not what you did in that other book. You have to go back and, do your homework and research it. So that can make it interesting. And then you have children in the mix that also live in the real world and who don't understand exactly what Dad does because he's done it their whole lives. And he goes out to his office and magic happens and a book comes out. So, so Mom has to be the one to, take him to the soccer games and make sure Dad eats properly. And see, I cheat because David's the cook. And he can always tell me, I'll be in 20 minutes. 3 days later, he's still forgetting to eat. But I send the children out, the girls especially. We have twin daughters. Go get your dad for dinner. And they'd run out and they'd say, come in and cook, Dad. And he's like, he can't tell them no. So he can tell me no because, but he can't tell them no. So he didn't come in and cook. So that's kind of how we balance things a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
The creative castle is great to play in, but somebody actually has to keep it inflated so that you can play in it.
And tied down to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's very interesting because myself, I have also gone into the zone, as we call it, and you lose time and space. Those of you who have gone into the zone where you're sitting there writing something, got that stupid grin on your face, and it's gone. And I remember doing this one time, and I got this severe headache, and I kept thinking, okay, well, I've got to go take an aspirin or something like that. And then I went, I shouldn't take it on an empty stomach. And then I realized I ate 36 hours ago. Mm-hmm. Okay, but you're so involved in your world that you are immersed in it. And sometimes you do need somebody to knock lightly on the door and say, come out, there's a real world here, you have to survive. Now I'm going to go to Ms. Brawner, who works with an extremely arrogant and egotistical husband, who has a delicate sense of pride. We often read each other's work, and we give input on the work. I can't judge how well I give input to somebody. I try to be diplomatic, but I'm always kind of like, well, project-oriented, we have to get this done. She is incredibly, or at least I sense it, as diplomatic toward me when she gives me input. And sometimes if I sit there and listen to it and I have a big smile, oh, she loves me, that was so sweet. And then she walks out of the room and I realize she just gutted my story. How did she do that? How do you approach that? And this is going to be a little more revelatory to me because I've never asked her this question. How do you approach that? How do you deal with another writer and give input, critiques, and suggestions without hitting those little trigger parts?
Well, this is a hardball question right off the plate. I love it.
Oh, I have a divorce attorney.
Good to know. Good to know. No, it's a good question. And how do you give input, particularly in situations like this, without triggering the other person? And this works for significant others as well as other people that you may be writing with, but you have to get your point across. You don't have to be mean about it. So it's always good to, you start off with the things that you like. You talk about the things that you like about the character or the plot or the scene, and then you talk about the things that you don't like quite as much. And you're honest about it, but you're not mean. You don't have to say, well, that was a shitty character. Like, why did you do that? That was really awful. Yeah, you wouldn't say that. That would be horrible. However, maybe you could tweak this character just a little bit here and a little bit there so that they're a more relatable character, as opposed to just, tearing it apart in an awful sort of way. And remembering that you want to be kind to your fellow writers, your fellow creatives. You're trying to make it better. You're not trying to destroy them as a human. That serves no purpose. So really it's being kind.
It is, huh? Okay. That's interesting because I know when she has given me notes, and I thought maybe this was a trick. She will talk about something and she'll give me some notes that is basically a kind of a core note, and then she'll say, "Did you want a sandwich?" And then she'll go and get me a sandwich. And I'm kind of like,
also helps.
"Did you do that just to get away from me, or do you know that a sandwich would be good? Actually, pretty nice." Food is always good. Rebecca, you kind of mentioned a bit about the dominant voice, and I wanted to explore that more because in a lot of collaborations, there is a dominant voice between the partnership. And most of the time, people don't acknowledge it because they think it's ceding power to one side or taking power from the other. When I had my first partnership as a writer, back when I started in television, I was the dominant voice, but only slightly. I recognized that my partner was incredibly good at character, I was incredibly good at plot, and we worked back and forth on that. We learned from each other. But do you feel that that dominant voice shifts back and forth when you're dealing on the creative realm and, more importantly, when it gets turned over to the business realm?
I see what you mean. Yes, I become, in a lot of cases, the more dominant voice when it's in the business realm. However, Kevin, who has this explosive, meteoric career behind him, sometimes wants to say yes to things that don't necessarily make good business sense. And sometimes he goes ahead and agrees to something that I have to do the business end of that is next to impossible, and I don't know how to do it. So that is not pleasant because Kevin sometimes has that final voice because, golly, he's Kevin. What can I say? He really does amazing things, and if it means a lot to him to say yes on something, then I do get overruled. And that's quite painful because he knows he's going to leave me with a bunch of stuff that I just said I couldn't do. So, and Kevin has, in most cases, he works with other established writers. And he has the fairly equal relationship with them. They're just every now and then he works with newbie authors to get them a chance to get into a bigger publication, and then he's usually the final say and the final edit on things.
Interesting. And by the way, you should know, when you're on the phone with Rebecca, you can hear the shift between her sides. And I'm not going to go into detail, but we were one time on the phone discussing.
Your split personality.
Yeah, we were discussing another author and this author's work, and creatively it was kind of like this and this and this and this, and then it shifted to the business side of this particular person, and it was suddenly like, okay, and then it was kind of like this, and I was like, oh, okay, what happened? Somebody got off the phone and put somebody else on the phone. I'll tell you who later we were talking about. This was a long time ago.
I'm fascinated.
I know. But it's interesting, you're talking about the dominant voice going back and forth, and you predominantly have the business voice and the creative voice. Okay, so Sharon,
Yes.
you are very fan-friendly.
Okay.
I've seen your podcasts. You are very fan-friendly. Now, I'm going to ask you, first of all, are you the protective wall between David and the fandom, or the interpretive wall? Are you basically that beacon with the fandom? And how do you deal with that? Because you're dealing with the fandom side, on his side you're dealing with the creative side, and sometimes they cannot clash and should not clash.
Yeah. When we started out, I got David invited to his first autographing ever. I got him invited to his first convention ever, and invited back the next year, even though they'd met him by then. So, and I probably bought the first book he ever sold because I was working in a bookstore. It came in, and before it was supposed to be on the shelf, I had bought one with my employee discount. And then I called him and I said, we've already sold half of your books. Do you want the other one? Because they had sent 2 because he was a brand new, Yeah, there are times, okay, David is, not so much now, but back when we were first starting this, he was a big guy with a big voice and a big, ego and everything. And a lot of fans, I hate to say it, are not always sociably competent. But yes, all of it. They really don't know how to talk to somebody, especially, oh my God, it's him. And so a lot of times they'd come up to me and they'd ask me a question. And I would say, I really don't know the answer to that, although I did, and I'd heard it 49 times this convention, but okay. And I would take them gently by the arm and go, David, this person here has a great question about one of your books coming out or whatever. And I repeat the question, and then all of a sudden, the nerd that's been talking to me, because I'm short and I'm female and I'm not scary. Approachable, yeah. And then all of a sudden, they're talking to David. And David likes to talk. Anybody who's ever met him, it's hard to get him to shut up sometimes. So then he would be talking to the fan, and and that fan, that's all they wanted, out of a con, was to be able to talk and meet their author, God, if you want to put it that way. So we've done that, and I've actually had to go between David and get him out of a group of 30 or 40 fans that are, it's time for David to come eat now, okay? So nobody's going to tell me no because I'm his wife, And it's, David, it's just 4 o'clock in the morning. I got to get him to bed, because David will, he thinks that it's very important to, and I know, I've seen Kevin do this before. If there's a fan asking a question, he will stay there until that question is answered, and that's, the fans want that. And if you want them to buy your books and you're a nice person, then you will continue talking. I've seen some authors that shut fans down like that. I don't have time to talk to you, or just be really ugly, and I'm like, these people are buying your books. This is what's feeding my children next week, So yeah, we're going to be nice to the fans because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fans. So sometimes you do have to kind of intercede in there a little bit.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, one of the ways I judge celebrities, having worked in television and film, I do know a lot of them, is how they relate to their fans.
Mm-hmm.
If they are arrogant, then I really don't want to have much to do with them. That is a very good, important point. These fans are the whole reason you are there. And if people are coming up to you to tell you how much they love what you've done, and you try to shut them down, you're a pretty crappy person.
Yep. And you also have the fans that are a little cray-cray. And sometimes, David is not going to go to security and say, this fan is maybe a little too involved in our, and I'm usually the one that will do that, go and talk to security at a con and say, maybe this person needs to be watched a little bit closer.
We've been talking about a lot of the things that couples and collaborations have to struggle with and have to deal with. So we're going to go into a positive note here. And I've got to take myself out of this somewhat because it goes to Jessica. So I'm not the only author, writer that she has dated. I'm just the one that she married. When you have collaborated with another creative person, I always I refer to this as an upward spiral as opposed to a downward spiral, and that is a phrase that I use when I deal with when you're dealing with actors who don't respect the work, you don't want to put your heart into the work, and it becomes a downward spiral. If you work with actors who respect your work, you love to see what they do with it, it's an upward spiral. It's the same thing for authors. So if you're dealing with another author, how do you keep that upward spiral going so that you're not just the advisor, you are actually integral. You are both creating a story. How do you beat out the story, work with the characters, laugh, have fun, and get to that full idea of the bouncy castle as an upward spiral?
Well, it's a really good question, and I'm going to go back to something that actually you said in one of your earlier talks, that taking improv classes is great because then you learned the yes and. Yes and. You can get the wildest ideas out there. Yes and. Where does that go? Yes and. And that helps create the bouncy castle atmosphere where you can talk about anything. They're not all going to end up in the story. I mean, if you're trying to do an urban fantasy and you've got spaceships, that may not end up in the story, but when you're breaking ideas, when you're talking about those ideas, when you're creating the story, you don't want to be like, nah, definitely not. You want to be with the yes and. Maybe it's not an actual spaceship. Maybe you're at a space museum. I don't know. But go with the yes and really help build up the idea from that, and then go back and look at the beats of the story and go back and break down, well, what are the character motivations here and here and here, and then go use that to really create your story. But don't, if you're collaborating with somebody, don't just shut them down. You don't want to shut down that creativity. That leads to hurt feelings. It leads to stories that aren't as good. It leads to places that aren't as creative. So use the yes and methodology when you're working on that, and take your feelings out of it as much as you can, because not all of your ideas are going to come in, and not all of their ideas are going to come in, as you're building this, because it is a collaboration. So.
Yeah, and I think the idea is that you are trying to make the story better, both of you. So you look for what's best for the story, not what's best for your pride and ego. That requires a lot of respect for your partner. And we're gonna show off our shirts, and this tells you how we work together, so you can see. Now, the reason for this has nothing to do with this. Yes, this one says my wife is my favorite author. Hers is my husband is my favorite author. Now, it's not a comparison of the writing styles. It's the fact that I love working with her. We are sickeningly sweet in this. During COVID, we drove around the country 12,000 miles. Half of that was breaking stories. Half of it was just driving along and we see something like the biggest ball of twine museum or whatever, looking at it, that'd be cool, we should go there. What if Captain Jack actually found the spaceship or found that ship that was in, oh, okay, and then we're breaking a story. We were just having an incredible amount of fun. I trust her. She's not out to grab anything away from me, and she enhances me. That's the whole point of that. So for us, it's not just story building. We are children. We are playing. We're enjoying each other's company. And we're also giving each other a little bit of therapy, because you can talk about your problems in a story format without accusing anybody of a particular problem. And I don't mean that you do that like duplicitly. They don't know, she doesn't know that I'm actually talking about this. You realize that a lot of things that you discuss actually come up about your relationship and how you relate to each other. And her strengths help my weaknesses. My strengths help her weaknesses. And between the two of us, she makes my stories better. I hopefully make your stories better. And we just enjoy listening to each other's voice. And I mean on the written page. You know how it is when you read something and you hear a voice, you can recognize that voice. I enjoy hearing her voice. Now, another aspect of this, and we kind of talked about this was the idea of if you are working with somebody who goes into a zone, okay? And it's time for dinner. And I can tell you, you probably experienced this. When you're in the zone, do not disturb me. I'm in the zone. The kitchen's on fire. I said, how do you get into the practical aspect of piercing the zone long enough to say, and you touched on this, there's a real world we have to deal with. So Sharon, you talked a little bit about this. I want you to talk a little bit more about that, and then Rebecca, I want you to also handle it, and then Jessica. So back to you.
Well, somebody's got to stay in the real world, okay? Somebody's got to make sure you eat, sleep, hydrate, so you don't. David has sat in his chair for 16 hours straight before. And he's just in the zone, don't bother me, and this was before the kids were here. And, I would go out occasionally and open the door and, yay, still there, okay, and close the door. But after the kids came, like I said, we always, as a family, had dinner together every night. Now, sometimes when the kids were in soccer and we had a game, our dinner might be 10 p.m., it might be 6 p.m., or somewhere in between. But we always made a point of doing that together. And David realized that this was an important aspect of family. So he was not upset when we would go out and say, it's time for dinner. David also is the cook. I don't cook. Nobody likes my boiled water. They want me to put stuff in it. I don't know. But the kids would help him cook, and that was another time bonding. It was time he was going to be spending in the house anyway. So if he would take one kid, and they would rotate per night, which kid was up. There have been other times, okay, David and I have been married for almost 26 years. This past summer, I had my 36th surgery, which was removal of a cancerous tumor. So we've been through radiation and everything this year. 7 of my surgeries have been to fuse my spine totally down. And I like to say I can take David for granted because we have been through so much together, even before we were married, that I know I won't wake up one morning and he won't be there because of my health concerns or whatever. And that is really super important. So sometimes that breaks him out of the zone because he has to deal with me or, got a doctor's visit, you want to go, and he's always right there. So, and our kids are in college now, except for Michael Paul, who was in the Marine Corps. So, hoorah, yeah, stationed in Turkey, just left Jerusalem. So, yeah, like about a week before the shit hit the fan over there. So, there are times when I pull him out of the zone because Michael's going to call. And, he has to be dad for a while. So, another thing is, you guys have to read each other's works, okay?
Yeah.
I don't read David's books. I started trying, before we were even married, when we first met, he'd sold his first book. And I've read a bunch of them, but then I realized I couldn't keep up with his writing schedule. He has so many books out, and I couldn't read fast enough because I have some vision problems. And so I don't read his books anymore.
Audio books.
I haven't gotten into those yet, but
Love them.
but David's also were 4,000 hours long, so
Yeah, that's true.
but that's also, don't feel like if you're the non-writing spouse that you have to. I read scenes and stuff, and we
Right.
talk plots and characters and stuff, but I don't read his books anymore.
Okay.
So that's just.
All right. And Rebecca, piercing that zone.
Wow.
What happens when you're both in the zone? That's what I want to know.
Kevin's zone is different. He's got a quick focus. I do not. I'm very ADD. Anything can distract me. It can take me hours to sink down into the book and to upload everything my brain needs in order to edit or whatever I'm doing to it. If somebody comes in and talks to me, even if it's one question, it can flip me out of the zone, and I have to spend another 2 hours to get back to that point where I was. So Kevin knows that about my work style, and I had to learn his work style. And one of his favorite things in the world to do is right. That is not true for me. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do. It is one of my favorite things in the world to have done. I like the accomplishment. I just love the way I feel afterward. But it is torture for me. And if I'm at that point where I'm really getting stuff done, he'll just sneak in and put food in front of me and sneak back out, because he is also the cook in our family.
Yeah.
Cool.
I've actually given David pizzas like that, order Papa John's and sneak in. And,
Yeah. And if he's out of town, I forget to eat. I will go
Mhm.
a day or something
That's
and get a migraine because I have forgotten to eat.
yeah,
Right.
that's David.
I'm a little more what Rebecca described. When I'm in the zone, I'm in it. And I've said to people, and I take please don't feel like I'm dismissing you. If you want to talk to me, walk into my office and stand over to the side so I'm aware of you. That allows me time to shut down the voices in my head, put bookmarks in my plot. Then I will turn and address you. And she has been fantastic with doing that, although I feel bad sometimes. But now casting this to Jessica, okay, how do you do that generally with people, and how do you prefer that your zone gets interrupted for the real world?
Well, I have to say, he does the thing where you go and you stand and you wait for him to shut down the bookmarks, and that actually took me a long time to learn. And I probably drove him insane for the first 2 years that we were together, because I'm a Russian, oh my God, this is going on, and blah, and leave. That's how I am. So the learning to deal with that was challenging, really challenging. And for my own self, I have my own little form of ADD where if you tell me something, I'm going to do it now. Okay, you need something done, tell me now, I'll do it now, and then I'll go back to what I was doing. If you tell me now and then want it done later, that may not happen. Maybe, if I remember it well, it may not.
We use a whiteboard for those things.
That's very sensible. But no, for when I start to focus on stuff and when I get into it, my brain takes a snapshot of what I'm doing, and so for me, going back to it is a little bit easier, which is nice. But I do forget to eat, which is why it's great. We have a little system worked out. He brings me lunch, and I bring him dinner. And he's in charge of lunch, and I'm in charge of dinner. And it doesn't matter what else is going on. He's in charge of lunch, and I'm in charge of dinner. And that actually helps
really
out
good.
a lot, because he also forgets to eat. But he'll at least eat dinner, and I'll at least get lunch. So that seems to work pretty well.
I remember one time she was working on something. It may have been business, it may have been a book, and I just wanted to engage her. And so I had one of those selfie sticks, long sticks you can put a phone on. I put a cookie on the end of it, and I just pushed it through the door. And I heard her pause. There was a minute. She goes, "Cookie!" Okay, so we have a little less than 5 minutes here. So this is where we go into our couples therapy. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions that they might want to ask us about working together?
Test. Okay, thank you. This has been so enlightening. I really appreciate you all bearing everything for us. So I've been kind of fortunate to be able to go full-time this last year, and my goal is to obviously hire the person who provided me the financial runway to do that. The bad news is she's an accountant, and she's really, really good and she's also expensive. But when I can afford to hire her, what were some pain points or some things that you learned in that first year or two when you both were working together that maybe we should be aware of?
Oh, I've got one.
Oh, please.
Get your own office.
That
Get
is
your own
very
office
true.
with a door and close it.
I believe firmly that everybody should have their own creative space, and nobody should be threatened by the other person's creative space.
Yep.
When we moved in together, I had a guest room, moved into the house that I had. I had a guest room, and as soon as we decided to move in, I said, "You have to have that room. That is yours. That is your space." and she put her office in there. And yes, that's an extremely important thing. That's a great point, Sharon. It really is.
And a lot of times, the reason you need that is because what encourages you to write may be the opposite of your spouse. So if she needs peace and quiet to focus on her numbers, you don't crank the music up to 11, which is why you don't share an office. Kevin is like that. He has his music cranked to 11. I have the TV on mute with just the closed captions, so I know if something happens on the news. But I'm working in total quiet. His office is on floor 1 on the south side of the house. I am on floor 3 on the north side of the house. And so we had to learn that we have our own ways of doing things, and you don't mess with the other person's method.
100% agree with everything they've all said. And in addition to that, talk about what working together is going to be like. Like, talk about it actively, openly talk about it. What are your concerns?
Without getting angry.
Without getting angry at each other. Yeah, this has to be a
conversation,
conversation.
not a debate.
Not
so.
a debate.
There has to be give and take.
Yes.
You know, you get something good, you get something good back.
As a partial answer to that from people I've worked with, find a space, words, something that says, we are now in business relationship. We're done with business, now we can go cuddle and watch TV, Netflix, and chill. Don't mix business with Netflix and chill.
Yeah, and that's a good
If
point.
only.
Hence the office, yeah.
Yeah, and I put it in, don't get angry because you left the pie out in the middle of a story meeting. Yeah, that's a very good point. You need to have those defined boundaries where you can work, but also, in television, there's a different thing about this because there's so many egos involved. I've been in story meetings where the discussions over creative issues, because television is all about business and creativity, we have got into screaming matches. And I mean to the point that invectives are being thrown. You are such a da-da-da-da, you boom, 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 and we are just, bam, going at each other. And then somebody goes, oh, lunch, where do you want to go? Patty's? Cool, let's go. And you go and you have lunch. And we have a great time. Then we come back, okay, where do you want to pick up? Oh, yeah, you stepped about, But in television, that is normal. And again, you're not dealing with a marriage there. You're not dealing with a significant other where those things can overlap and stream into each other. We've got about 22 seconds, and I could sit here and do a countdown for you. But I hopefully, good, we have another question, great.
Fast? One thing my husband and I have done, even though we've been married 10 years, is took personality tests and actually talked about when you do that, it's actually meaning this. So that was like a tangible thing that was really helpful. Do you have other tangible questions or things?
Well, we are at our end right now, so we can't get into that, but we will talk to you about that later on. However, yes, there are things that you have. It comes back to defining the boundaries. So I want to thank everybody who was on the panel here and hope they have a wonderful relationship in their future.
All three of us are red.
And thank everybody out here. Thank you very much. Yeah, what is this with the red hair? The walking red.
No, we're just very determined to keep our authors in